I'm Lisa Shepard, and I am the Executive Director of the Chief Justice's Commission on Professionalism. The mission of the CJCP is to enhance professionalism among North Carolina lawyers, judges, and law students, a mission which it has been doing since 1998. One of the ways that the CJCP does this is to sponsor this historical video series, which is a collection of video interviews of distinguished lawyers, judges, and professionals from across North Carolina. The CJCP began filming these video interviews in 2000 as a means to preserve the thoughts of these bar leaders on the legal profession and on professionalism issues. All of the videos in this series are available to you on the CJCP website and the CJCP's dedicated YouTube channel. We are so fortunate to have had many distinguished members of the North Carolina Bar over the years, and they have much accumulated wisdom to share with us. It is important to understand that the practice of law is a profession, and doing it well requires not only substantive knowledge that one gains in law school and from studying for the bar exam, but also the value of experience learned from other lawyers. I hope that this video series will give you not only a fresh insight into the person being interviewed, but also some meaningful information about how to be a better lawyer in your own practice. Enjoy, and remember, esse quam videri. Strive to be professional in all that you do, rather than to merely seem so.
Hi, I'm Mel Wright. We're here in Chapel Hill today at the School of Government to make a presentation of the 2012 Chief Justice's Professionalism Award to Jim Drennan.
Good day. I'm Franklin Freeman, and I'm here at the UNC School of Government to interview the 2012 recipient of the Chief Justice's Professionalism Award, Professor Jim Drennan, longtime professor here at the School of Government and former of the Institute of Government. I want to begin by exploring Jim's early youth and development down in McCormick, South Carolina, where Jim grew up. I'm a great believer that we're molded by our early beginnings. And Jim, tell us about growing up in this county seat town down on the Georgia line.
Well, McCormick County is the smallest county in South Carolina. It has about 7,000 people. It's in many ways, it's like Mayberry without Andy Griffith. It was a very good place to be born and raised. I grew up in a family of loving mother, loving father, and two sisters. I was the last one. I was the baby. I was the only boy. They allege, at least, that I got special treatment. I've never seen adequate proof to believe that, but that's a strongly held belief among my sisters. And so I grew up walking to school when I wanted to, or riding my bike. It was about a mile away. It was a sort of a classic small town environment. And it was the kind of place where pretty much if you did anything, everybody knew about it. So my mother didn't need much supervision because the whole town was available to supervise me if they needed to be. And that was true of all my friends. So it was a very warm and loving place to grow up. We spent a fair amount of time at church. It was a community environment for us. It was a small school. In fact, my high school class had 37 people in it. Graduates. There were two schools. There was a elementary school, and then there was one high school. And I lived in a bubble. I lived in a white bubble. I grew up in the middle of the transition brought on by Brown versus Board of Education. It was only much later that I realized the kind of bubble I lived in and sort of the dark side of that bubble, which I've been thinking about a lot as I've grown older. But it wasn't a safe bubble for me to grow up in. As I look back, that safety wasn't extended to everybody, which I think was one of the great moral failings of our society. But McCormick was a good place. It's a poor county. It's mostly red clay and pine trees, and a lake on the Georgia border. So, but I personally was nurtured and supported and given wonderful support by my family and by my community, and it was great.
When you were, particularly as a teenager, what activities were you involved in? What work did you do? Most people in small towns in those days had some sort of job.
They did. My father was a small businessman, and by small I mean small. He usually had maybe 1 or 2 employees for some. He had a lot of different enterprises. The most I remember him having employees was maybe 5 or 6. So when you have a small business, it's the family's business, and that was certainly true in our case. And so I would pinch hit for him through most of my sort of teenage years. His business involved providing food services to the local textile mill. And so that meant it was a very irregular job. There were 3 shifts. Somebody from my daddy's operation needed to go and check on the machines at every shift. And so I would sometimes do 2nd and 3rd shift duty. It was actually pretty sweet because there were always leftover candies and pastries and sandwiches and Cokes, and I had the keys to the vending machines, and so it was pretty easy to get whatever I wanted. And so I wouldn't call it hard duty, but that was my job. I did in the summers. I worked for the princely sum of $1.25 an hour for the State Highway Department as a road crew person, cutting down bushes and digging potholes to test soil and stuff like that. But in school, I did the newspaper. I was a little on the nerdy side. If you have a continuum, I was probably past the halfway sign of the nerdy side. But I did play football and basketball until maybe the 9th grade. And then to be the classic nerd, I kept statistics for the group after that as the team manager, and had a great time. My best friends were all in that. I was not graced with great athletic gifts, so and I had the judgment to see that by the time I was maybe in the 9th grade.
What were your strengths as far as academics concerned in high school? What were your interests?
What were my interests? I was never interested much in science or math, so I drifted to what we now would call the social sciences and the liberal arts. Mostly history and what I came to realize when I went to Furman, political science and government, current affairs. So it's not surprising, I guess, that I ended up in a place like the School of Government.
McCormick County was adjacent to or near Barnwell County, as I recall, and in your day, Barnwell County had both the Speaker of the House of South Carolina's House of Representatives and the President Pro Tem of the Senate for many years. So basically, Barnwell County, Senator and Representative ran the county, didn't they?
That is correct.
Or state, rather, ran the state.
Pretty much. That Barnwell's maybe 90 minutes from us, but culturally, it wasn't much different from McCormick. It was a pretty small county, and to have those two, and in those days, there wasn't any thought of term limits, and so those two gentlemen stayed on for decades, and they pretty much had a stranglehold on South Carolina government, which essentially meant it was rural oriented. It was the big cities of Greenville, Charleston, Columbia. They always all their initiatives had to go through Barnwell.
Where did you, or what helped move your interest in government along? What helped develop that?
That's a very good question. I've often wondered why we end up doing what we do and what role chance plays in that, what role we're sort of destined to do that. I'm not sure I can give you a definitive answer. I tended to enjoy reading about the law, about legal conflicts. I liked the TV shows. I love Perry Mason. I mean, the world should be like Perry Mason, where everything comes to a clean, definitive, and more or less satisfying conclusion. And I thought, well, if he can do that, maybe I can do that. I don't know. I'll give it a try. But beyond that, I've always had this interest in justice, what it means, from not from being a really tiny kid, but by the time I was at college, I was, and maybe it's as simple as I see my grandchildren, and they're always interested in getting their fair share. They want to be sure that somebody else doesn't get more than. And I have great grandchildren, so I don't think that's an excessively. I have wonderful grandchildren. In fact, I have perfect grandchildren, but. I think it's built into us that we have some yearning to be treated fairly, and justice is ultimately about that. And so I think I didn't know it, but I think I was sort of a justice seeker from pretty early in my life.
That led you from Furman to law school.
It did.
Where?
I came to Duke Law School. One of my really good professors who was very, very good to me was a man named Don Acey, who was a political scientist but also a Duke Law graduate. And he had recently come from the law school, so he knew a lot about it, and he counseled me to apply there among other places. I applied some other places. It's a sign of the economic world I lived in then as opposed to the world I live in now, that with something like a $1,500 a year scholarship, Duke would have cost me pretty much exactly the same thing as going to the University of South Carolina Law School in the 1970s. And so I did get a scholarship and came to Duke because it was considerably more prestigious, and I wanted to get out of South Carolina. I mean, I didn't go very far, but I did want to at least cross the state lines to see what the world was like. And so it was economically viable and turned out to be a good place for me. So I ended up at Duke in the 1970s, early 1970s.
And from Duke, you came to what was then the Institute of Government.
Correct.
How did that come about? And tell us about your early years. That's when I got to know you, was when you first came here in '74, I believe.
I did. And I think our paths started crossing pretty regularly from then on.
Within the first few days of your coming.
That's right. Well, if you're in law school, you look at places to work. And I'd have been a political science major, and so I didn't know a lot about the mission of the Institute of Government, but I had a sort of an intuitive sense that it was something I might be interested in. And I went to an interview, and John Sanders, who is the person for whom the building this interview is being taped in is named, was the director of the Institute of Government in those days. And he came over, and if you've ever met John, you know he's a very impressive person. And he became, to me, really one of my mentors and one of my role models and one of the people who's really sort of shaped my career. And so he invited me to come to work as a law student, law clerk, after my second year. I decided to split my summer, and so I did. I actually worked here at the Institute they had long summers in those days. Ended up working 6 or 7 weeks here, and a month in Richmond at a law firm, and a month in Charlotte at a law firm, or maybe 3 weeks at a law firm. They were very kind to let me come in for that short period of time, but it gave me a sense of what life was like in the private practice and what life was like here. And I found the work at those law firms, as best I could tell from that limited experience, to be stimulating and challenging, but the subject matter just didn't resonate with me the same way that the subject matter of what was going on here did. So I got offers from some places, but one of them was from here. And it seemed like the right thing to do for me. I didn't know then that I would love teaching, which I do, but I knew that I liked what they were about. I liked what this place was meant to do, which was to make government, however it's defined, and government is constantly being redefined in our world. The role of government will never be settled in this state or in the United States. But it's one thing most people agree on is that we need government. I mean, when we come together as a collective group of people, we have to govern ourselves. And the mission of this place, where I've spent virtually my whole career with a couple of detours, is to make that government work, to make it work for the people who empower the government officials to lead them. And our mission is to help those people that are entrusted with the really difficult, challenging work of moving society ahead, helping people live the good life, however they define it. That's the mission of the School of Government. That it's written more elegantly than that, but that's really what it's about. And it was a pull for me. It was a lure for me. It reeled me in emotionally. I like to say when we have people who come here, and we have wonderful people who work here, they need to catch the virus. They need to catch the virus of making government a better institution than it was last year. If they catch that virus, they'll like it here.
Albert Coates would be mighty proud of you, Jim. I think you just articulated the vision he had for this place when he opened it, commenced trying to fund it, and did successfully, obviously, in the 30s.
Albert Coates was a amazing person. I came on after he had departed from the Institute. He'd actually fully retired. But I would see him most days walking across from the graveyard over to the law school through our parking lot. He would come by our offices sometimes and drop off books he'd written, and he'd always have an inscription with my name on it, which I always thought was pretty cool, that he'd taken the time to write everybody's name. Yeah, he's one of those people that make the world a different place. They leave the world different than they found it. It's a real gift. He was, by all accounts, a difficult person to work for, a little bit of a rogue, a man of incredible vision. He turned a simple idea into a robust, important institution in this state. And that idea was, he was a law professor. He was teaching local government law. He was teaching criminal law. And he took the initiative to go out and talk to people who actually applied local government law and criminal law. And it became apparent to him pretty quickly that the law he was teaching was not the law they were applying. And he set out to bridge that gap. One of his books was called Bridging the Gap. And that's really what the Institute of Government and now the School of Government is about. It's about making sure that the laws that we write are the laws that we apply, and vice versa, that the people who are in the business of applying the laws can help shape what those laws ought to be. Because they're the ones who actually, the rubber meets the road when a city council or a city manager or a county commissioner or a judge or a district attorney has to make a decision that's based on the law.
Let's talk a little bit about the role you have had in fulfilling that vision. As I recall, when you started out in '74, you worked with Ed Hinsdale, who at that time was the person in charge of educating the judges in the state district and superior court judges. A new court system had just really been finalized in 1970 with the last of the districts coming under the General Court of Justice. So we had a new infant to nurture and grow. And you've been growing it now for 38 years. Tell us about working with Ed and how over those 38 years you have seen the system, with the great help of the School of Government, evolve, the court system, because most of your work has been training judicial officials.
That's right.
With the two detours we'll talk about in a minute or two.
Yeah, when I came here, I was in a newly created position that the legislature had created. We'd seen a lot of growth, and I was actually assigned to work in two areas. One of them was I used to say, carry Ed Hinsdale's briefcase. The other was to carry Ben Loeb's briefcase. Ben Loeb worked in our area of motor vehicle regulation, and I ended up doing a lot of work specializing in the law related to impaired driving. And so I did spend a fair amount of time doing that, but most of that work involved working with court officials. And so the bulk of my work here has been working with the court system. And you're absolutely right. I was not there at the very beginning, but I was there pretty close to the beginning of the development of the North Carolina court system. And I've had the great privilege of working closely with people who manage that system, people like you when you were the director of the Administrative Office of the Courts and later. Had a great privilege of working with them and seeing how they work hard every day to make justice a reality to the people in the state. We started out with a grand vision of a uniform and unified court system, one where every person, wherever they find themselves, whether it's in the smallest county of the state or downtown Charlotte, which is sort of the most urban center, most densely populated county in the state probably. We had discovered that we had a system that had evolved to the point where injustices were done solely by the structure of the system. That we had different kinds of courts hearing the same kind of case in different places. We had different kinds of fee structures. We paid some of our court officials based on the results of the decisions they made from the fees that were collected. It was a system that evolved over a century, and it needed retooling, and some very wise and thoughtful people developed the system we have, which values uniformity greatly. The notion, it's a simple notion, the notion that in our justice system, you get the same kind of official with the same powers and duties, the same salary, hearing your case or resolving your case regardless of where you come from. That justice is not dependent on whether you're from a small town or a large city, or whether you're from the east or the west. That's the ideal. As you and I know, we have seen over the years that ideal is a hard one to achieve. And what I've observed in the operation of the courts over the 30 years is that uniformity is still kind of an animating principle, but there are many, many exceptions to the idea. We have, and we could talk about that a long time, but in general, there seems to always be a tension between the notion of having a central unifying principle to organize the courts and the desire of people in communities to do it differently. And sometimes the desire in the people in the communities prevails. And so they may get special programs that have special fees that no other place pays for. There are a lot of examples of it, but on balance, it's been a marvelous opportunity for me to see just dozens and dozens and dozens of people give their lives, give their professional lives to this idea that justice should be equal and available to everybody. That's a great privilege.
Over those 38 years, there'd have to be hundreds, probably.
Hundreds, yes.
That you have trained and developed.
I've seen generations of judges come and go.
You've seen fathers and sons.
I have seen many times. I've seen And now both are retired, which tells me something about what I should be doing. When we have, yes, I've seen many, many wonderful people. You're right, it's probably hundreds. It's probably thousands if
Yes.
you count
Yep. The
Superior Court
magistrates and the-
judges, district court judges, clerks of court, prosecutors. My work has touched all those people in some ways. I've primarily focused through the core part of my career on judicial education. That's really where, but I've worked with clerks of court a lot, and now I spend most of my time with clerks of court and enjoy it very much. The work they do is really important and often not as appreciated as it should be.
Over the years, beginning in '74 until today, what major changes have you seen in judicial education and in the role of our judicial officials?
Boy, those are two really interesting questions, and let me try to unpack both of those. Judicial education. When I started working in the 70s, judicial education was not even a concept that many states approved of. It was a field that was in its infancy, really. We were a little ahead of the curve having the institute. The institute predated the formation of the court system, and so we were able to provide education to court officials from the very beginning. But there were quite a few states that didn't. Slowly, it became the national consensus emerged that judges needed an opportunity to continue their education the same way that physicians do and every other professional group does. When I started, judicial education was primarily one person in front of a room of many people, dozens or hundreds of people, with that one person talking and those other people sitting and listening and taking notes. Lecture was the overwhelming choice of education.
Much like law school.
Much like some of my law school classes, and yours too, I'm sure. One of the great advances in judicial education is the beginning to marry the notion of how people learn, the field of education, with the field of helping judges learn. And some of the best people in this business are not lawyers, they're educators who think about how people learn, and then they find other people to come in and actually do the teaching. One of the things that's been really gratifying here is to see the way the Institute's mode of providing education has evolved from lecture being now not the predominant way we teach, but much more interactive work. Because at the end of the day, it's not about what I as a lecturer know. At the end of the day, it's about what the people in the seats learn and what they do with what they learn. And so we focus much more on application of skills. We've focused much more on skills. We've been fortunate to get help from the General Assembly to have enough money to have more seminars where people can come in and in smaller groups interact, express themselves, explore their own issues. It's been a really helpful evolution.
I won't, you're too modest to mention this, but over the years, the judicial education program here at the School of Government grew to the point that the leadership here at the Institute or the school and the leadership of the General Assembly concurred that there should be a judicial college.
Correct.
Here. And you were the first dean, I suppose, of the Judicial College.
Director.
And
we only
director.
have one dean, yeah.
And it is, it's basically named for you, as I recall.
No, but it's...
in honor of you.
No, well, I don't think that's right. But I was the first director.
And because of you, I think because of the reputation you had with the you let me say this, you don't have to protest because it's true in my view, but because of the reputation you had with the judiciary and the legislature was happy to fund that and to set up the separate judicial college here. And I hope it continues to thrive.
So do I.
I know you do, because it's with the increasing number of judges that we have, the value and need for it only continues to grow.
It's doing really important work. There's a class today of district court judges who are exploring in depth the issues related to, and it's either abuse and neglect or delinquency. I don't know which of those, but that's an example of what the new world of judicial education is about. It's about smaller groups of people focusing in depth on a particular topic, bringing into the conversation not just the legal issues, but the other kinds of issues, the psychologists and the other kinds of professionals who bring to bear on people who understand child development in that context. And that's true across the board, whether we're talking about substance abuse or family law or criminal law. That's been really exciting and gratifying to see. And I'm very, very pleased that I think the Judicial College is funded at a sufficiently good level that we can continue to offer those programs. I think they're really important to help court officials continue to grow. Once you get that job, you've just begun to have challenges. And you've just begun to have the need to learn more. I mean, that's when you need to go into overdrive in the learning mode. It's when you get that job. So that's been really wonderful to see. I would add that I think you helped some in the process as well.
The second part of the question is the role of the judge, how you have seen it evolve, or the role of the judicial system, perhaps, because it would encompass more than the judges, obviously.
The role of the courts has changed. The courts have evolved from a pretty classic adversarial model, which is still the predominant mode of resolving disputes, to one that has many other facets. Alternative dispute resolution is now a fundamental part of civil litigation and resolution of civil disputes in a variety of methods, but that was a change of thinking for the people in the courts. On the criminal side, there's been a pretty significant change in the way many judges think about how to solve particularly troubling, difficult problems. And to pick one, substance abuse. It's a really hard issue in our society. It's very democratic. It cuts across all class lines, all social strata, all communities. Everybody faces that issue in some form. There's been a move to create something called problem-solving courts, where judges' roles are fundamentally different than they are in a regular criminal court. Those judges who are engaged in that kind of court will see a case come in. They'll make a disposition, but they'll make that disposition in conjunction with a whole range of other people. That's called staffing. And at a staffing meeting, a drug court judge, for example, will preside, but there will be a DA, there will be a public defender, there will be a probation officer, there will be a social worker, there will be a mental health counselor, there will be a sort of a case manager, and they'll all talk about what should happen to this person as they go through their probation period or their period of supervision. And that judge, typically it's one judge, sometimes there are a couple of judges, will see that person over and over again. The person has to come back every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks or every month, depending on the system. And so there's feedback. There's feedback from the participants, there's feedback from the court, relationships develop. That's not the norm in court adjudication. Normally what courts do is dispose of the case and it's gone. And I think one of the real downsides for judges is, in that kind of world, the only feedback judges get is negative. If they send somebody out on probation and that person does well on probation, there is not let's come back and I want to thank you, judge, for sending me back on probation. There's no positive recognition that something good has happened. But if the person violates, depending on the court, the judge may well see the person again. So it's unfortunate that judges don't, because most of the time, statistics would say, people don't come back. Now, their recidivism rate's not as good as it ought to be, but it's still not over 50%. Judges are deprived of that positive feedback. They get it in drug court. So the people who do that work really like it. Some judges cannot conceive of their role as having that kind of social work component to it. But that's the beauty of working in court administration. It now has multiple faces. There's now not just one version of what it means to be a judge. So it's good. One of our challenges here, of course, is to try to deal with all those judges in wherever they are.
And have the array of courses
Yes.
that will help them.
Correct. Yeah,
Well, you mentioned you took a detour
I did.
or two,
I did.
and I know I had a major part in at least the first one.
You had a major part in both of them,
In both
actually.
of them, but,
Yes.
but certainly in the first one, because I was trying to entice you away from here to become the legal counsel, permanent,
Yes.
full-time legal
Yes.
counsel at the Administrative Office of Courts back in the mid-'80s.
Correct.
But ultimately, you came back here.
I did.
Why?
I liked working at the AOC. I liked both, but first time you enticed me to work for you. The second time you left the job, and so I was asked to follow you in that job, which was
As the
not,
fourth director of the Administrative Office of
which was
Courts.
not an easy job to follow you, I can tell you. Both times I found it to be, they were different, but both times I found it to be really gratifying because I was surrounded by people who essentially shared my understanding of what public service is about. Most everybody at the Administrative Office of the Courts when I was there really cared about working to make the courts function better and to help the people who were in the field to do that work. They had great technical skills in various ways. There's always a tension between Raleigh and the field, and that was certainly true when I was there. But I think on balance, it was very gratifying. But I came back here because ultimately, I really like teaching. I really like having good conversations with people, and I really like teaching adults. I still teach. I teach law students some, and I have for the last 15 years, and I like that. I like working with young idealists, people who are about ready to start. But I learn from teaching adults. I never teach a class that I don't come out of the class having learned something from the people in the class. And that's especially true now that we teach in a much more interactive way. And at the end of the day, administration or even practicing law for an agency, while it was very stimulating, I found that my place was in the classroom. It was really where I was most comfortable and most gratified. I got most meaning out of it.
You mentioned your grandchildren a while ago.
Yes.
And that you had perfect grandchildren.
Yes.
I know that you and your wife, Ann Carroll, I call her because that's what when
That's
I
her
first.
McCormick name. That's right.
That's when I first met
Her
you
city name
all
is Ann, but her McCormick name is Ann
in
Carroll.
'74.
Right.
But you and Ann Carroll have been married how many years now?
We got married in 1972, so 40 years. 40 years. It's been wonderful.
Well, she is a wonderful person, and
She's one of my heroes.
well, and I would agree. I would agree with you. You have two children.
I do.
Tell us about your children, your grandchildren.
I have a son who lives in New York who is doing really well. He works in a company that helps nonprofits maximize their fundraising. I can't think of any more noble work than helping people like the American Cancer Society make sure they have the resources to do their job. And that's what Jonathan does. And I think he's very good at it because he's been successful in the company he's with. My daughter Jennifer is married and has 4 children. She lives in Durham, close to our house. She's married to a minister. My son-in-law is the executive minister of a large and growing Baptist church in Durham and Wake County. They have presence in both. I've been blessed. Both my children are really wonderful young adults in their own ways. They've taken different paths through life, as one would expect them to. We wanted them to have roots and then to fly. And they've both flown in different directions, but they both make me proud.
They're fine children. I know both of them and have known them since they were little tykes. And your 4 grandchildren, too. Well, now you
So
are...
I have an urban son who, you know, and his partner Mitch,
Yes.
and then I have a suburban daughter. I have one of almost everything with Oma too. I've been very
And a
blessed.
rural mother-in-law
I
still
do.
living,
She's from a town called Plum Branch, South Carolina.
which was a suburb of McCormick.
It was 5 miles away. Yes, I've had a wonderful, rich life.
Jim, you alluded a moment ago to growing up in basically what was a segregated society,
It was.
as practically all of us of mine your age did in the South in the 50s and early 60s. What impact did that and has that experience had on you?
It's been a ever-present and profound impact on who I think I am. And I was dense. I didn't get it when I was there. The world to me was completely normal and natural. When I was a teenager, they closed the only public swimming pool in my town rather than let black kids swim in the water. I didn't blink an eye that was wrong. So I've come to realize, as we all have as a society, that kind of segregation was morally wrong. I've found heroes in strange places doing this. When I was in high school, we were not early adapters to Brown versus Board of Education in the town I grew up in, because I was a high school senior in 1967, and Brown versus Board of Education was handed down in 1954. The first black students in my high school joined my senior class in 1967. So for 12 years, there had been no black kids in my high school at all. We had 2 young women who joined our class for the senior year. I regret very much not reaching out to them. I should have. To my wife's credit, she did. We were classmates, but I didn't. But the grace with which those 2 students lived that year, as I look back on it, really has inspired me. And we recently seen one of them. One of them has passed away, but the other one, her name is Julia, which is the same as my sister's name, came to one of our reunions, and she's still incredibly gracious. It's inspired me. I think thinking about those issues, thinking about fairness, really, thinking about what and how now it's a much more complicated world now. I think it was simple and wrong then. There still are, I think, many examples where we're not as fair and inclusive as we need to be in a variety of settings involving people's civil rights. I think that's part of the reason I've been so interested in fairness, and so one of the things I teach here now for some of our judges and clerks is this notion of fairness, because I think it is a core value of the court system. If there is a more fundamental value than fairness in a court system, I really don't know what it is. And so I think that's the beginning of talking about what a court system should do is how are you fair? How can you make fairness an everyday occurrence? We have a lot to do in that area. The perceptions of people who are not white about our court system are different from the perceptions of people who are white. Without saying who's right and who's wrong, that's an issue. That's a problem. That's something we need to continue to focus on and try to sort through and figure out. Minorities are vastly overrepresented in things that are not helpful, like prisons and juvenile court involvement. And so there are major efforts across the country to figure out why that is and to sort it out and to try to deal with it and make sure we're fair in the way we deal with each case. And we should continue to do that. It's a journey we may never end, but we need to continue to move down the road. And certainly where I grew up has shaped the way I view those issues. That's the lens through which I view them. As I say, it was a wonderful place to grow up, but it was a bubble.
Well, you are winding up your career here at the School of Government. Tell us a little bit about that, what you are finishing up with, and then what you intend to do after that with your family, with those grandchildren and your children and Ann Carroll.
I'm in a program called Phased Retirement. I'm in the middle of a 3-year program. I'm working primarily now with clerks of court and doing teaching on a variety of isolated topics. I've begun to focus some on things like ethics and fairness and judicial philosophy, so I teach segments of our courses for judges on those topics. It's good. I'm enjoying having some time to waste, basically. I can't say I've been productive, but I've enjoyed not being productive. After that, I don't know what comes next. I've probably got a year to sort that out, and figure it'll take care of itself. Things always have along the way, so I have faith this one will too.
Speaking of faith, I know you're very active in your church. You and Ann Carroll both, and you are a person of great faith. And you've been very active in the community in Durham, in working.
My wife is much more a pillar of the community than I am, but yes, I've done some work there. My church is very important to me. I go to a church called Watt Street Baptist Church. We've been there over about 40 years. We spend a lot of time there. And I can't imagine my world without it, frankly. It sort of shapes how I view the world and what I expect from me and from my Creator, and importantly, how I should deal with the people I'm come in contact with. It's become increasingly clear to me that we're expected to make the kingdom come on earth and not just in heaven. And so that doesn't happen automatically. We're all God's children, but we're all God's hands too. So
that may be a fitting conclusion to this interview, because you have just encapsulated for all of us, I think, why you have received the Chief Justice's Professionalism Award. And that's because you are not only a model professor, a model teacher, a model administrator, but you are a model person. Jim, congratulations.
You're very kind. Thank you.
I first met Jim Drennan when I was a young, newly appointed and elected district court judge working at the School of Government. We had a conversation about the need for more training for new judges, not just coming and meeting with a couple of judges. And over the years, we've really developed our program for new judges. But Jim was really intent on us doing more than substantive law, that we needed to really talk about what being a judge was about, what was needed, what kind of attitude you should have. And I know that one of the things that has been a great help over the years to many judges across the state has been his plan for district executive seminars. That's a seminar where you bring together the senior resident, the chief district court judge, the district attorney, the trial court administrator, the clerk of superior court, the public defender, to talk about the ways to make their district better and to work together as a group with collegiality, as opposed to always being fighting each other, trying to take the lead when someone else might need to take the lead at a certain point. Those programs have really made a difference in the districts that have been able to participate in them. They are the kind of things that Jim has foisted in many ways on judges. You know, let's talk about things other than just what the substantive law is, because judging is much more than just deciding what the law says. Judging involves attitude, judging involves administration. And in the recent years, the work that he has done with the chief district court judges in leadership, in bringing us together and talking about what our job is about, not just we've got to be there, we've got to say, okay, Judge A, you go to this courtroom. There is much more to leadership as a chief district court judge than just assigning judges. And over the years, Jim has made sure that all of us in the trenches, down at the court level, have thought about things other than just the law. He has made sure that we think about how we interact with our colleagues, how we interact with the lawyers, how we interact with the public and the other folks who come in, with our county leaders. He has made a difference to the way in which we handle our courts and the way in which we see the folks who come in before us. And that's what makes Jim such a great leader himself, is the way he inspires others to follow his lead.
I've known Jim Drennan since I got out of law school. We started together at the School of Government and have known each other all these years since. And Jim is, I've told people many times that I count on Jim to be my Yoda. That is, he's the guy who I always turn to when I need advice, because I don't know anybody who has more wisdom, more insight, who's more thoughtful, more careful, and really who you know, understands the world and all the intricacies of relationships and everything else it takes to really give the best advice. I don't know anybody other than Jim Drennan who does it in the same way that he does. So it's been a real pleasure for me to know him all of my life, but more importantly, it's been a treasure to have him as a partner through many of our endeavors. We work closely together on structured sentencing. In fact, little known fact for most people is that the structured sentencing bill in North Carolina was really written by Jim Drennan. And he put enormous hours into that legislation, into the training that went with it after it passed. He's just been an invaluable asset in so many ways to the School of Government. But where I think he's made the biggest difference is among the judges of North Carolina. And I served as a judge for 17 years and had the opportunity to learn from Jim and to rely on him for advice and for insights into new laws or how we should do things in the court system. So, you know, Jim Drennan has meant the world to the legal profession, to the judiciary, but he's meant the world to me personally, and I'm really proud of him and proud to know him and really pleased that he has received this award.
Jim, I'm delighted to be able to participate in this presentation to you of the Chief Justice's Professionalism Award. I can't think of anybody who has done more to promote legal professionalism, and particularly judicial professionalism, than Jim Drennan, and therefore nobody more deserving of this award. We've known each other for almost 40 years, and throughout that entire time, you spent your career teaching, training, mentoring, advising judges and other court officials throughout the state. You've done it all with calmness, with deliberation, with good humor, and with patience, and everything that a judge should try to be. You've helped us with pattern jury instructions. You've written bench books for trial judges to use on the bench. You served as an advisor to every person who's served North Carolina as Chief Justice in the last 30 years. Not only that, you've been an advisor to governors, legislators, and even university presidents. I think, though, the most important thing that you've done is to establish the best judicial education system in the country. Bob Hobgood, Beth Keever, and I were together with you in St. Louis when you conceived and planned the idea of a North Carolina Judicial College. You're not only the architect, but the general contractor, the financier, and the dean of that college. And it's through your vision, your perseverance, you're seeing it through the legislature, that we now have the Judicial College at the School of Government. I just want to thank you, Jim, for all of your service to the state, and you do the same thing in your community, in your church, and with your family. And you do it all with modesty, and you won't take credit for any of it, so I'm glad that tonight you're getting that credit.
Jim Drennan cares more about the court system than any person I know. For Jim, it's really about how we treat each other as a people. It's about our core democratic values of fairness and justice and equality, and that all sounds really corny and old-fashioned, and that's okay because Jim is corny and old-fashioned, but in a very good way. Most court officials know the very direct ways in which Jim has helped improve North Carolina's court system. He's done a lot of direct advising for them. He's developed innovative courses. He's drafted legislation, and he's even taken a leave of absence to direct the administrative office of the courts. I want to talk about a minute is a little bit of the behind-the-scenes, indirect ways in which Jim has worked to improve the court system that most folks don't see unless you happen to be here at the School of Government. And that's by setting a great example of professionalism for his colleagues here on the faculty, who've watched him and emulated him and become better as a result. And so what have they seen over the years in watching Jim as their leader? Several things. One is that they've seen a person who respects court officials no matter who he's working with. Jim knows the difference between a magistrate and a clerk and a judge and a justice, but you never would be able to identify where any of those people fit on a hierarchical chart based on how Jim interacts with them. He treats all of them with the greatest respect. They see someone who understands judges and court officials and what they do in intimate detail. Jim not only understands the work that they do, but he understands the environment in which they do it and the challenges that they face, so that when he gives them advice, whether it's over the phone or in the classroom, it's real practical advice that makes a difference. They see someone who has enormous good judgment and great common sense. Jim's the go-to guy not only for court officials, he's the go-to guy for us here in the building at the Institute of Government, the School of Government. He's the guy who, if I have a hard question or a problem or a challenge or a dilemma, and my colleagues feel the same way, Jim's the guy we go to, whether it's an administrative question, a legal question, or frankly, a personal question. Jim has great judgment, and I don't know where that Solomon-like wisdom comes from. I'm sure it's a combination of family, his religious faith, something in McCormick, South Carolina, where he grew up. I'm also sure that a part of it is his wonderful wife, Ann Carroll, who in so many ways has been a good guide for Jim and has made him better in so many ways. But his colleagues here have followed Jim's lead, and indirectly he's made all of us better at serving court officials. We watch what he does, and it honestly makes us want to be better. It makes us want to do it better. It makes us want to do it with even greater integrity. And none of us can emulate Jim, we know that. But we're better than we otherwise would be in our work with court officials by having Jim as an example. I'm delighted that Jim's receiving the Chief Justice's Professionalism Award. I'm sure he's embarrassed by it. I'm sure he believes he's not worthy. And for the first time, I can honestly say he's wrong and his wonderful judgment has failed him. He is richly deserving of this award. Congratulations, Jim.
I like what this place was meant to do, which was to make government, however it's defined, and government is constantly being redefined in our world. The role of government will never be settled in this state or in the United States. But it's one thing most people agree on is that we need government. I mean, when we come together as a collective group of people, we have to govern ourselves. And the mission of this place, where I've spent virtually my whole career with a couple of detours, is to make that government work, to make it work for the people who empower the government officials to lead them. And our mission is to help those people that are entrusted with the really difficult, challenging work of moving society ahead, helping people live the good life, however they define it. That's the mission of the School of Government. That it's written more elegantly than that, but that's really what it's about. And it was a pull for me. It was a lure for me. It reeled me in emotionally. I like to say when we have people who come here, and we have wonderful people who work here, they need to catch the virus. They need to catch the virus of making government a better institution than it was last year. If they catch that virus, they'll like it here.
It's my special privilege at this time to call on Chief Justice Sarah Parker for a very special award. Chief Justice.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Chief. First, let me thank the North Carolina Bar Association for hosting this wonderful evening here at the Pavilion. The continued support of the Board of Governors of the North Carolina Bar Association and the counselors of the North Carolina State Bar for professionalism among North Carolina judges, lawyers, and law students is invaluable, and I thank you. The support of the State Bar and the Bar Association is critical in fulfilling the mission of the Chief Justice's Commission on Professionalism, and I am sincerely appreciative of all that you do for us. Tonight, I am honored to be with you to present the Chief Justice's Professionalism Award. The award is presented annually to a member of the North Carolina legal community who has demonstrated the noblest attributes of the profession throughout his or her career. This evening, I am truly privileged to honor a highly respected lawyer, educator, and administrator, one who has throughout his career exemplified the highest ideals of our profession. This year's recipient is James C. Drennan of Durham, North Carolina. Originally from the metropolis of McCormick, South Carolina, Jim graduated from Furman University and then received his law degree from Duke University in 1974. Shortly after graduating from Duke Law, Jim began his teaching career with what was then the Institute of Government, now known as the School of Government at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. In 1985, Jim was promoted to Professor of Public Law and Government. And from 2002 until 2012, when he began to eye retirement, he was the Albert Coates Professor of Public Law and Government, a distinguished professorship named for the founder of the Institute of Government. In 1993, Jim took a leave of absence from the School of Government and served for 2 years as director of the administrative office of the courts. Throughout his years of service at the School of Government, Jim has been a teacher, mentor, advisor, counselor, and friend to judges, clerks of court, district attorneys, public defenders, magistrates, legislators, and state agency personnel. The scope and excellence of his scholarship and teaching are reflected in the broad range of topics, including court operations, the DWI laws, structured sentencing, and most recently, fairness, ethics, and professionalism, on which he has lectured at judicial and clerks' conferences. The listing of the articles, journals, and manuals he has written and edited consumes several single-spaced pages, as does the list of committees and commissions he has chaired and advised for the university, the legislature, and the courts. Among his many contributions to judicial education, Jim conceived, nurtured into being, and obtained funding for the North Carolina Judicial College, of which he is still director. Not one to toot his own horn, Jim is a quiet, mild-mannered, unassuming fellow. But over the past 20 years, few, if any, pieces of major legislation or court projects affecting the administration of justice in this state have been passed or implemented without some input from and consultation with Jim Drennan. During that same period, few, if any, Superior Court judges and clerks of court have not called on Jim at some time for a quick answer or advice on handling a knotty problem. Not surprisingly, Jim's contributions have not been limited to North Carolina. He is nationally recognized as a judicial educator, serving leadership roles for many years in the National Association of Judicial Educators and speaking at seminars on judicial education and court operations throughout the country. Jim has also been a pillar of his church, serving as chairman of the Board of Deacons, as a Sunday school teacher, and in numerous leadership roles for many years at Watts Street Baptist Church in Durham. Jim is devoted to his family. He and his wife, Ann, who is here this evening, have 2 children, Jonathan and Jennifer, who are also here, along with Jennifer's husband, David Thompson, and Ann's mother, Mrs. Cornelia Carter. Additionally, a number of Jim's colleagues and friends are here tonight to help pay tribute to Jim. Jim's grandchildren are his pride and joy. Jim is the go-to guy for those who serve or have served in the judicial branch of government. With integrity, good humor, commitment to excellence, and generosity of spirit, Jim Drennan is a gentle giant who has improved the administration of justice, promoted the rule of law, and personified professionalism in the conduct of his daily affairs. The video clip you are about to see will have only 4 speakers other than Jim, but without doubt, hundreds of others would echo the sentiments voiced by those 4. Words are not adequate to express the esteem, affection, and appreciation with which Jim Drennan is held by his colleagues and those of us who have benefited from his talents and dedicated public servants. As the video illustrates, Jim Drennan is truly deserving of this honor. And I turn your attention now to the video. As Chief Justice of North Carolina, I proudly and humbly present the 2012 Chief Justice's Professionalism Award to James C. Drennan with deep appreciation for all his service to the judicial branch of government and to the people of the great state of North Carolina. Jim, thank you.
Microphone is mine. Okay. Wow. I'd like to meet that man someday. But thank you, Chief Justice Parker. Thank you for this great award, and thank you for who you are and what you do for the courts. It's been a privilege of mine to work with a lot of court officials and a lot of chief justices, and they're all special. But I've been particularly thankful for the way as you show your leadership to the courts by not only keeping court officials grounded in the realities of their daily lives, but keeping the focus on the ultimate mission of the courts, which is to do justice. And I hear you in many, many settings, and I very much appreciate the way you point the direction for those of us who work in the courts. So thank you for this. I need to thank Mel Wright and the Chief Justice's Professionalism Commission for this humbling award for me, and to thank Mel for making professionalism his life's work and making it important so that awards like this are created. So, and for not vetoing this particular selection. So thank you, Mel. I was shocked to get the letter, to be perfectly candid. The path I chose, I've loved my work. I've loved, not every day, but most days. But by its nature, we're not on the front line at the School of Government. As the video points out, we're there to help the people on the front line. And so it was a little bit of a surprise to me, but here's the dirty little secret. I am keeping it. Most of the time, the nicest things that are said about folks are at their funeral, and it's really nice to hear nice things. Even if they are exaggerated, like tonight, before one like me has left the building, so I appreciate this very much. My family's here, and I can't tell you how pleased I am that they could be here with me. As the chief has pointed out, my daughter Jennifer and her husband David Thompson are here. And my son Jonathan is here. Thank goodness. His plane was an hour late from New York, but he did get in under the wire, and so we're... and one of the reasons I'm glad this event is taking place is that it lets me say in public how proud I am of them, of the work they do. They're all, you know, you have these children and you wonder, and then you snap your fingers and they're adults. And we don't know what kind of adults they are, but they're all adults. Well, in this case, I couldn't be prouder. Both my son and my daughter and my son-in-law are engaged in meaningful work and activity to make their communities and their world a better place. And I don't know what more a parent can ask for. They also come home for holidays, keep in touch, and in Jennifer's case, shares her 4 children with me. They're not perfect children, but they are perfect grandchildren. And you know, it's okay that they didn't get the part about always agreeing with Dad. You know, that's okay. I've come to learn that that's also part of being an adult. And I could not be prouder of the work they're doing and the lives they're leading and the impact they're having on the people around them. And my mother-in-law is here, who, Mimi to me, Cornelia Collier to the rest of the world. She's been spending some time with us recuperating from a serious fall. And she's shown me again what courage and determination is about as she goes through a difficult healing process. And in the eyes of her physical therapist, I think she's really a superstar. And my wife is here, my best friend, my lifelong partner for 40 years. Anne's a model of how you live a life, I think, of how you live a life of faith and practice. Every day I watch her help people around our community to cope with grief and illness and life's difficulties without any credit or compensation or any of those things, because it's the right thing to do, and she's called to do it. She's really my hero. I guess you're glad I don't have a big family. I gotta thank the people on this video. You know, it did take a few bags of cash sent by my friends, but it was money well spent, I can say. I'd spend it again. I mean, John Martin, if you had a Wikipedia entry for appellate judge, all you need is a picture of John Martin. He does everything well. He leads, he judges, he takes all the hard problems, and he gets elected. I mean, he's a, which of course is the first thing you have to do the other three things. But he's such a wonderful judge and such a role model, and the person, when there's a hard job, you don't have to wait long to figure out he's probably going to get the task. Beth Keever is the rock of the district court. There's nothing important that has happened in the district court in the last 25 years that Beth hadn't had a significant role in. Because she's not only just an exceptional judge, but she cares deeply about the system of justice. And she has these very wonderful leadership skills, and she's sacrificial in the way she spends her time, and the state's unbelievably lucky to have her as a district court judge. Tom Ross, as he says, started with me. He's a good guy, but he really can't keep a job. We've been friends since the 70s. I got a job, I kept mine. He was in law practice, then he became a legislative aide, and then he became a Superior Court judge, and then he became a court administrator, and then he decided, well, there's a foundation out there that needs leading, and then he felt the call of his college, the place that shaped his life, and now he's decided, after all those, I think I'll go get an easy job. I'm in phased retirement. I don't know what Tom's in, but it's not phased retirement. But there's just not a better example of public service in this state, and it's been a real privilege for me to get a chance just to share vicariously in all the great work that he's done. And I've been a huge admirer of his, even if he weren't my friend, but he is my friend, and that's probably more important to me. And Mike Smith, my colleague, who has, we had offices next door to each other for many years. Mike's he was a wonderful faculty member, but he's also been an exceptionally able academic administrator, and led the Institute of Government to be the School of Government through trying times, ups and downs. And Mike is still a person whose passion and vision and determination is something that I have admired very, very much. He fiercely believes that the university can help government, and that government will then help its people live, as I said on that video, live the good life. And he's devoted his entire career to that proposition and done it with incredible distinction. A voice you didn't hear, but who was central to this, was Franklin Freeman, who there was a long interview which they grace blissfully cut, so you didn't have to listen to it tonight, but Franklin interviewed me for a long time. That was that part where I was talking. And Franklin's been a great friend for as long as I've been working at the school. He's been such a role model for so many people who care about public service. He's a lot like Tom. He doesn't really stay with the job very long either. He was the director of the AOC right before I went over there, so I had to go over and follow in his footsteps, which if you were picking someone whose footsteps to follow in, he's not one I would advise you to pick if you're looking down the road. But The thing I most admired about Franklin was his ability to stick to important principles that he values. Things like honesty and integrity and civility in the harshest of climates, where the political world meets the governmental world, meets the policy-making world, and the pressures to depart from those are so great. That when I'm sort of depressed about government, I think about Franklin and say, yeah, you can do it. It can be done. Everybody doesn't do it, but it can be done. So I thank you for that, Franklin. And I will say, there was a time when I did a lot of traveling with Franklin as we'd go to judicial conferences, and it was always interesting because I would always hear the same stories. Has anybody here heard the story of Horace the Mule more than 100 times? We're going to have a caucus over here. And I have colleagues here. I hope I get them all. Tom Thornburg, my colleague, Shay Denning, Jamie Markham, Cheryl Howell, John Rubin, Jesse Smith, my newly halfway retired colleague, Janet Mason, and my fully retired colleague, Joan Drennan. I hope I didn't miss anybody. Are all here. I'm very grateful that they came to share this with me. Every one of them are gifted as teachers, as researchers, as writers, and as consultants to people who work in the courts. They are an exceptional group of people. And I will say, the bar on hiring has been raised dramatically since I took the job, for which I'm eternally grateful. I'm glad I didn't have to do what they have to do to get hired. But I'm proud to be their colleague. And I know that any one of them would be deserving of an award like this. And I want them to know that this award is not just for me, but it's an acknowledgement of the shared work that I've done with all of you over the years. And so for that, I thank you. 40 years ago, I was, as Yogi Berra said, at a fork in the road, and I took it. Doug, there's your baseball illusion. I don't know where Doug Gill is, but my friend Doug Gill, who used to be on our faculty a long time ago, thought we needed a little baseball humor. But I took it. I was at a point in my life where I had to choose. Did I want to go into traditional law practice, or did I want to go into something different? And so I had this opportunity to do something different. And I took what the poet calls the road less traveled by. And for me, it really has made all the difference. I joined the Institute of Government, which was part academy and part practice. The part of the university that has its front door looking out to the community, not inside to the campus. That's always been our mission. I was fortunate to meet John Sanders, who interviewed me at the Duke Law School when I was a second-year student. I will say, if you've ever been interviewed by John, feeling fortunate is probably not the first thing that comes to mind if you're a 22-year-old law student trying to figure out your life's work. Because John can be a tad intimidating. But he's also been my mentor and role model in many ways. And he took a big risk. He hired me. And that's been what I've done. It took me a little while to truly get the virus, to figure out what the School of Government, now the Institute of Government, now School of Government is about. But I found out that it meshed perfectly with what I was about. I've been on a lifelong quest to figure out what justice really looks like. To help promote effective government, to understand the rule of law in a society and how law helps direct order and promote liberty. And the joy, the absolute joy of watching people learn things and see what happens to them as they learn things and as they develop. There's just nothing more exhilarating than that in many ways. So I'm here 40 years later. I don't know if you saw the play Jersey Boys, but at the end, Frankie Valli comes in and he says, "Here I am, I'm still chasing the music." You know, of course he's 80 or something, but he's still singing. I'm not still singing, but I'm still following those strands, trying to figure out where they go. I'm trying to lead what my college professor told me I should do, which is to lead the examined life, not the unexamined life. And I finally figured out that you don't ever learn it. It's a continual process. It's an endless journey where when you live the questions, the answers come closer to reality, but you always have to live with the questions. But this work that the courts do has a nobility about it. It has a granularity about it. It has a challenge about it. But at the end of the day, it has a nobility about it. And it doesn't matter whether we're at the Supreme Court or we're in small claims court, whether we're at the most expensive lawsuit around or a speeding ticket. We're still about doing justice. And the notion that people need to get what they deserve and they need to be treated well in doing that is so fundamental that we can never stop chasing it. I was really lucky in 1974 to be assigned to work with court officials. When I joined the faculty, I've had great, wonderful opportunities to meet incredible people, appellate judges, superior court judges, district court judges, prosecutors, public defenders, clerks of court, their assistants, magistrates, probation officers, court support people, people who work at DMV, who do hearings, people who treat people who have substance abuse, people in executive branch. I mean, it's an unbelievable opportunity as I sit back and reflect on this to get to know and work with that range of people, all of whom handle the pressure every day collectively of saying what justice really means in North Carolina. And they do it one case at a time, one face at a time. They do it with dignity, they do it with professionalism, and they frankly do it in less than optimum circumstances. And they still hold their heads high. Many of them have trusted me and opened their minds and trusted me and let me into their world to learn about what they do. And that's made me a much better person and a much better educator. So I want to close, and I know you're glad to hear those words, as I am every Sunday, and in closing, we will. But I do want to close by saying, in accepting this honor, I'm really doing it on behalf of all those unnamed court officials and other people who have helped make me what I am and who have been so welcoming to me. So I am keeping the award. I'm unbelievably humbled and still questioning the judgment of the folks who've made this decision, but I'm still going to keep it, and I will always treasure it. So thank you very much, and thank you again, Chief, for this great honor. Thank you to the bar for hosting this wonderful party and for letting me share in it. So thank you all very much.